Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Team Tuesday this week with Usman Kotwal. Hi, Usman. Welcome back.
Hi there. Thanks for having me once more.
Absolutely. So, Usman, on Tuesdays, we talk about teams, but as it usually goes, first, we talk about something inspiring, something that influenced you. So, what was the book that most influenced you in your career as a Scrum Master?
I would say something that had an impact on me, let's say the most recent, was definitely the book Empower by Marty Cagan. Just the idea of having a product team that is focused on a outcome. It made sense because I think when it comes to Scrum, when it comes to all these ideas regarding Agile, I think those ideas always are floating with us in concepts such as product goals and everything else. And the way it was described in a book and how to get empowered product teams, which was very also hands-on, gave me lots of tips and tricks on how to tackle things that I want to do in my work. And that's why I think it was incredibly helpful. Just a good book all around.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we are looking for here, right? Like to get our game to the next level, we need a lot of good books that give us inspiring tips and tricks to improve how we work. And sometimes it's just a different perspective, right? Because obviously, as you get exposed to many books, you start to see the world from many different perspectives, and that's always helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that, Usman. All right, so now we turn our attention to teams and how sometimes they become the reason of their own demise. So share with us a story of a team. Tell us how that team started to develop this little signs of a bigger pattern that was in the background. And, walk us through that whole story, like what was happening, the dialogues, the interactions. Then we'll talk about the consequences later on. But walk us through that story first.
Just going at the context of the setup that the team was. So it was automotive industry. There was a newly appointed product owner, several newly appointed product owners, and they were to have their own development teams. And those development teams, they didn't come from the company itself. They were bought as service providers. So we already have an interesting setup. So we have the developers in this as a service provider. And when negotiating the contract, what they had was let's say some anti-patterns and how to get financially rewarded, as in they made sure that the story points would be equivalent to a specific amount of money. So we're already off to a bad start. And because the product owner on the company or corporation side also did like lots of other things in the meantime, they also appointed a shadow PO, which was the product owner, which came from the development team itself. So that's just a starting point. So here we are. The team starts on working, and in the beginning they were very, very driven. They wanted to make sure to deliver fantastic outcome. It was a website, customer-facing website, which was integrated with the car and lots of other things. So it's actually a big deal. And several teams were working on it. But over time, you could see more and more that team got less and less interested. And I asked myself, okay, what is going on? What was happening was actually rather simple. I talked to the product owner from time to time, and I realized that the product owner was a bit hands-off in specific things. And what more happened is that the team never felt comfortable to engage stakeholders or customers. And it started off small because in the beginning, they wanted to engage, but they were blocked because the product owner was like, well, I think that's more of my job. Or they were like, oh, I've got to check that with my manager because that would be someone higher up. That would be a big deal. And the team would be like, in the beginning, sure, sounds like internal politics. We don't really want to get into. But that led to the effect that the team sooner or later felt more and more detached from the product, from the goal, and they felt detached from just working in general when it came to this setup.
How did the PO show that they were kind of stepping back, perhaps disengaging? Like, what were the patterns that you witnessed there?
The PO would only focus to be there during specific events. They were there during the planning. And even during the planning, it wasn't something like that they would stay there for the entirety of the planning, which to me was mind-blowing, by the way. To me, that was unheard of. But they were like, yes, I'm also the PO, but I also have additional responsibilities because I am in several roles. And that to me was, mind blowing. I was like, oh, that's really bad. But in larger corporations, this is something that happens more often than I expected. Let's say that way.
And as they started to kind of show that their responsibilities, perhaps their preferred responsibilities, were elsewhere, and that this was perhaps a second or even third job that they had to put on top of everything, I imagine that the team also said, okay, if this is not that important for the PO, then it can't be that important for us, right? Like, I can imagine those planning meetings to be a little bit awkward, since the team wanted to maximize the story points in the sprint, obviously, because that meant money. And the PO was probably not very interested in having those discussions.
Absolutely. And even if sometimes it came like ad hoc ideas, which came from somewhere else in management, and that would just relate there. I then talked to the product owner quite a bit, I have to say, because at the automotive company, I think being at the end of the food chain when it comes to such a large industry gives you a sort of arrogance. And this part of arrogance can also mean that we pay you money to get things done mentality. Instead of this money helps us to build partnership. And I think that the switch to that direction was what later on, after, let's say, a year and a half, I might add, after a year and a half was what got to the change, because this had lots of effect. The effect was rather simple, and that is you didn't have much to show after a year and a half. Well, let's be realistic. That could have been done a lot quicker if we just let the teams do what they needed to do, and if we had product owners which were focused to empower the teams and make sure that the teams knows the business context. But they were like, okay, this is secret. Maybe we can't do this and this and that. And a year and a half passed and lots of money. That's when people started to be willing to listen. Because in the end, you can talk about it as much as you want. I wasn't external on that one too. People need to be willing to listen before there's really any actual change.
Absolutely. I can imagine also the personal conflicts that some of the developers, perhaps even a majority of the developers, must have had, right? Like, because they go in and they want to make a difference, and they get stuck in this internal politics swamp. And that's incredibly demoralizing and demotivating. But on the other hand, they are employed by the consulting company, and they can't just go back to their employer and say, hey, I don't want to work here, right? Because that could in some cases even lead to being fired.
So what did happen, though, is something similar, let's say that way. And that is the company had a good name, the corporation to work for. So a few people just wanted to get into that project. And I deliberately call it project and not product development, because in the end, it was a project being managed. So they got into the project, they worked there for a bit, and then they got out just to have it on their resume, which showed the detachment. And with it, you obviously had a high rollover rate inside of the team, which all just made it worse. So it started to compound. So negligence and not having a focus and not willing to see eye to eye has an immense detrimental effect. It's kind of insane. Something I was aware, let's say that way. I wasn't aware that the cost would be seen that quickly and at that high of a price.
Yeah, absolutely. And this again kind of brings one of those topics from yesterday's episode up, which is when you have the gut feeling that something is going wrong, it's time to act, or sometimes get out, because I mean we're not supposed to fix all the problems in the world, but as Scrum Masters, we have the responsibility to act for sure. Usman, that was a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
My pleasure, and see you soon.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, but tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.